Hi, students. Here we are in coronavirus lecture again. We're doing Muckle, chapter 11 on the family. Marriage, family, and gender. Let's move this over a bit. Zoom it in. Okay, so marriage, family, and gender. Basically, there's two tasks during this week. Number one, we're going to talk about kinship, how people are related in families, and then we're going to talk about the gender spectrum, the cultural system by which men and women are assigned social norms and expectations for their genders. Okay, number one, marriage. Marriage has various functions. We may think that marriage is what happens when two people love each other and fall in love and want to get married, but it actually does social functions as well. It regulates sexual access so that we know legitimate access from illegitimate access. It regulates the sexual divisions of labor, what kinds of tasks men and women have in a family, and then it regulates the support and legitimacy of children. Marriage determines legitimate from illegitimate sexual access when people are having affairs or not. It also regulates the division of labor. Women and men typically have different tasks in a family. Some do childcare, some do hunting, some do gathering. There's different kinds of gardening or farm work, earning salaries versus spending them. Basically, what kind of job you have is related to marriage. And then the children. There's support for children. Human beings, as we know, have long periods of dependency, and this demands coordinated child care that is divided up between the adult family members, and sometimes these jobs are dependent on gender. Whichever gender you are determines what kind of job you're going to do caring for the children. Number two, legitimacy. Children born within marriages sometimes claim inheritance rights that are not available to children born outside of a marriage. So a lot of times when we're talking about family property or title or some kind of legacy inheritance, there's differences between the legitimacy children who were born to people who were married versus people who were not married. Spouses. Okay, so spouses, monogamy says marriage between only two individuals. There's serial monogamy in the United States where, um, yes, so you can be married to multiple individuals, but they have to come one at a time. So you have to have marriage, and then you have to divorce to that person, and then you can get remarried to another person in sequence to a succession of partners. The opposite of that is polygamy, where you have marriage to two or more spouses simultaneously, and there are two versions of that. Polygyny, which is a man having two or more wives. Most societies globally permit polygyny, so um, it's the norm. It's the norm for human societies to legitimate polygyny. Even today, most I don't know if they're most, if you count them up, national governments, but many of them do permit polygyny. The ones that don't permit it tolerate it, um, and not 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 tolerate it in legal practice de jure, but de facto it does occur. So you'd say, oh, in the United States you can't do that. Well, um, I can give you examples of men. Usually these are men from West Africa where marrying multiple wives is an index. We say an index of social status, and so there was a case a couple years ago with a guy who was pretty wealthy. He owned an apartment building. He owned several businesses. He was from West Africa, so he had a spouse back in Africa, and then he had a spouse that he married once he came to the States, which was his legal American marriage. Once you're legally married in America, then you can't marry other women. But then once his business took off, then his wife in Africa said, "Hey, I want to come too." So he brought her over with her kids, and then he married two more. You can marry up to four wives simultaneously in Islam. This is from guy was from Senegal, and so the first American wife was his only official legal American wife, but the other three were all his religious wives that were living in separate apartments in the apartment. He owned them all, and then of course, U.S. law just recognizes the one wife as the only legitimate one, and the three subsequent as girlfriends, right? Who would not be entitled to, if he were to divorce them, they would not be able to sue for alimony. But the child support is child support, whether or not he's married. So legally in the United States, there's really nothing the government can do to touch him because he's not claiming legally to have married them under U.S. law, and they're fine with it, right? They're completely okay being married to the same guy. This came out because there was a fire in the apartment building, and they were all coming out to the social services and EMTs and such to identify as wives. Let's see. So polygyny, it is relatively rare in those societies. So even in a society that permits polygyny, most men are monogamous because they can't afford to marry multiple wives. If you marry multiple wives, it means you're very rich. It's sort of like in the States, if you have a string of marriages, for example, any rich and powerful men that you know who have multiple divorces and multiple families and kids from those divorces, from those prior marriages. This is pretty common. It shows that you're a rich and powerful businessman. Most people can't afford to do that. There was a guy I once knew who was a professional, and he was doing a certain service that I was asking him about, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was a very expensive machine that you could purchase back in 2007. You could do three things: you could purchase that machine for your business, or you could get a boat, or you could get divorced." And I went for the third one. So basically, what he did was he had an affair, and the girlfriend became pregnant, and so he left his first wife, gave her the house, the alimony, the child support, and then he brought on the new wife, had the child with her, a new house, etc. So it's just showing that he's a very, very rich man to be able to do all these magnificent feats of funding. Polyandry is a woman having two or more husbands. I mean, he's only legally married to the one, but he's very closely connected to the original one too, economically and emotionally, because they're co-parenting his kids over there. So there's still we like to say that marriage is an economic and sexual relationship between two people, and so you take out the sexual relations, you still have those economic relations with the ex-spouse. Just reminding Americans you're not exempt from ordinary social relations with multiple spouses here. Polyandry is a woman having two or more husbands. It's usually connected to land shortages. So this is the function here is that basically in Nepal and Tibet and these other Himalayan regions, you have very, very limited farmable land. It's only these steep mountain valleys that have enough soil in them to farm. And so a family would very quickly run out of land if all four sons married, four women, and each of them had four sons. They would run out of land. So if all four sons marry a single woman, then she's only going to have four sons, and all four of the fathers who share sexual access to the same woman also share fatherhood of all four of the kids, and so those four kids inherit from their four dads, and it's all it keeps the property line. It keeps the population relatively small, except for the additional women who never marry. Presumably, there are opportunities for them, although it's not great. Exogamy is marriage outside the group. Minimally, this means avoiding the incest taboo, which we've already talked about, I believe. Beyond that, rules of exogamy create alliances between neighbors because you have to marry outside of your group. So your little village, no, you can't marry anyone in your village because you all belong to the same clan. So you have to go to a neighboring village and marry. And when you do that, people are going to move across, and that it creates these relationships and ties, and reduces stress and conflict. Endogamy is marriage within the group. Sometimes these are religious groups or social classes. When royal families are seen as gods, this can lead to violations of incest taboos with siblings getting married. Hawaii and Egypt. I think we've talked about this before. In the Bible, the patriarch Abraham was married to his half-sister Sarah. So we will come back because we're at 10 minutes.